Hello everybody and welcome back to my recaps of the Rilton Cup. Today I'll be recapping rounds 3 and 4 and I'm a few days in the future because I was too tired after my rounds to recap, but I want to tell you I am having the best tournament of my life at the moment. I'm having such a good tournament, so you guys just have to see what is happening in the next few games, but we'll start with round number 3. So I was pretty happy with my pairing because I saw I was not paired against a kid. My opponent had been playing chess for quite a while, and he also had a fair few games in the database, so I did get to see what he was playing. So he played the move. He played e4, and then I had done some preparation against this. So what he usually was playing was a delayed Alapin. So this basically, the normal way you play an Alapin against a Sicilian, it's like an anti-Sicilian, is that you play c3 on the second move here and you just try and push d4 in the center. But what my opponent does is he first plays the move knight to f3, and then after I play d6, then he's pushing the pawn to c3. So he's getting the same idea where you're trying to take control of the center, but it's just a move later. And it maybe avoids some of the lines that you might not like against the regular Alapin, like the move knight to f6 here. So yeah, this is what he played, and after the first couple moves I'm like, okay, yes, he's playing exactly what he played in his previous games. Usually he was playing after knight f6 the move bishop e2, which is a little bit tricky because if you take this pawn on e4 you lose a knight, and that's not the best way to start a game. So you just have to develop normally, just go g6, bishop g7, and castle. And that was what I was prepared against. But my opponent surprised me on like move number 4 and played the move h3. And I probably should know what to do here because this is not a rare move at all. But it's like, when I saw this over the board, I was like, h3, what is h3? And this kind of stumped me for a moment because this is not what he was usually playing. I didn't find any of his games in the database with this, so I was a little bit scared somehow that he'd prepared something crazy for me, like he was going to go g4, g5 and checkmate. Something crazy was going through my mind, but I decided to be a little bit calm and chill out and just play what I was planning to play anyway and just go for this idea g6, bishop g7 and castle. Like h3 is not a scary move and it doesn't really threaten anything, so I can just keep developing. I still that same tactic, so that pawn on e4 is never ever hanging until I castle or somehow defend this diagonal. So I just play g6 here, and then my opponent plays the move bishop to d3, and again this is very different from what he was usually playing. Maybe this is something he prepared specially for me, I have no idea, but the idea is to put this bishop on this long diagonal and then push the pawn to d4. So it's an interesting way to play. It's not super scary though, so I can just develop my pieces. I put my bishop on g7, he brings the bishop back to c2, and then I castle. So now he also castles, and I play the move knight to c6. So I'm just using this knight to control the center. And here my opponent plays d4, and I decide to play something a little bit strange, and the engine doesn't love it. I was looking at games in the morning and I was like, I saw some games where players had played the move e5, and they're basically playing this in a King's Indian defense style way, where after the opponent takes the center with the move d5, we'll put the knight back on e7, and then later put this knight on e8, and then use the kingside pawns to just push over and try and checkmate our opponent, where all of our pieces will move to the king side and we'll start pushing here with f5, f4. And because the center is closed, my king is not in too much danger. So this was something I had looked at, and this really stumped my opponent. I guess he had not seen this move before, but he started to think for a long time. He thought for like 20 minutes on this move, and this is kind of a good sign when your opponent starts to think a huge amount in the opening. Like before, he had almost all of his time left, an hour and 28 minutes, but after this move, sorry, he did not play d5, but after this move, he played rook to e1, which was actually a mistake according to the engine. Because the reason why it calls it a mistake is because I can just trade off all of the pawns and trade off basically everything. And then in the end, I'm just going to play bishop e6 and d5 and go into an equal endgame if I want to. But I do not want to go into an equal endgame. I want to get an attacking fun game. So I do not take. I do not trade and take yet, just because I want to play for something exciting and I want to play attacking chess, and you know, we're both not GMs, so we're not going to play perfectly, so it will still be really exciting and fun. So he plays the move rook e1, and then here I decide to just play h6, and this is a bit of a waiting move from me. Not the best way to play. I should have just taken according to the engine for sure, but I'm just playing this little bit of a waiting move by pushing the pawn to h6. This also stops the knight from coming to g5 in the future, so if I'm ever making an f5 push, it means that his knight can't so easily get into the g5 and e6 squares. And also I have the opportunity to put my king up on h7. It's easy for my opponent to create a plan of trading off the bishops, because now I've created a little bit of a block against trading them off. So that's why I play this move. My opponent plays knight to a3, so he is maybe not so sure. He doesn't really want to go into this with pushing here. He also didn't want to take as well. Like, taking is also fine, but it's probably just going to be equal after these trades, and I do get to control the d-file, put my bishop on e6. And I thought this looked fine for me if this was played. So my opponent tries to play in the spirit of an Alapin by developing the knight to a3. This looks like a weird move, but it does work in a lot of positions. But usually the idea with knight a3 is you put your knight on the c2 square, and then you maybe take it over to e3 or something like this. So usually the idea with the knight a3 reroute is to put the knight on c2 next, but at the moment there's a bishop in the way, so this maybe is not the best plan right now. So here I decide that I will trade the pawns, just to release some of the tension in the position, especially after this knight has made this journey over to the side of the board. I decided I would just trade off. Now he takes, and I just take. So we're getting this same sort of thing where we're trading off the pawns. But now if takes, I mean, it's just going to be pretty much the same thing where I can just play bishop e6 and d5. I decide here that, you know, there's nothing else better to do. I waited a long time to see if my opponent's going to play d5, and they don't. So I'm like, okay, let's just trade off everything. My bishop should be good on this long diagonal as well, I thought. So that was my plan. So I decided to trade off, but now he throws in this move knight to b5. And this is a little bit of an in-between move, which allows this knight to maybe become a better piece. Like, it was stuck on the side of the board, but now if I play like a6, he can use this knight to go from the side of the board into the center and keep a knight in the middle. So after this trade, he can put a knight in the middle of the board, and it's going to be really strong here. So this is the idea with playing knight b5. But here, I think for a while, and I decide I want to make things crazy and I want to make things complicated. Like, I can just play a move like rook to e8, develop another piece, put pressure on the e-pawn. But instead, I want to make this a fun game, so I play the move d5. And my idea with the move d5 is that if you just take here, then I can trade, and after takes, I can take the pawn on e4. And here, you know, you can take back the pawn, but after takes, there's lots of tactics here, with the problem being that your knight is pinned to the queen, and also this rook is on the same area as the knight, so this would actually be just a fork here, or later you're just going to lose some material because of all the pressure on this knight and the queen on the d-file. Like, I can just bring a rook over to d8 if needed, attack everything. So yeah, this here, I thought looked nice. If he just went for the trade, I was going to take on e4. I was going to trade knights and take on e4. But then there was also another possibility that he could push forward with e5. And I created the plan that I could put my knight up to this e4 square, putting pressure on the f2 pawn, and also stopping the rook, disconnecting the rook from defending e5, so I can take this e5 pawn right now at the moment. I have two attackers and he only has one defender. So this was my plan. And he does play the move e5, which is the best move. And then I jump the knight forward. And now here he takes the pawn on d4. And I decide I will grab that pawn on e5 and be a little bit greedy. So after he takes and I take, it does look, initially f3 looks like it might win a piece, because if I move my knight away, my bishop is hanging. So this looks like a little bit of a scary move and is a bit tempting, but it doesn't actually win anything because I can just go queen f6 and create a new threat on this knight here where I would be taking with check and then move the knight afterwards. So here the best move instead of f3 is to take the pawn on h6. And then here there's some crazy tactics going on. You can go knight takes f2. If the king is taking, we have queen h4 check, attacking the bishop and the king. And after the king moves, we take the knight. And then here the bishop has to return back to defend. And in the end, we're going to be up a pawn. So this is some crazy stuff that could have happened. And the engine somehow is still equal here, but my opponent does blunder. My opponent blunders and he plays, instead of bishop takes h6, he plays f3, which looks really tempting because it looks like a win stuff, but it doesn't. I play queen f6, attacking the knight. And then here, he brings his bishop in to defend. And now I have to think for a moment. My opponent also, I've noticed, is starting to get low on time. He has 12 minutes left and we are still 23 moves away from time control. We were really far from getting extra time. So I was starting to go, okay, let's make this as complicated as possible because my opponent is starting to get low on time. So I think for a while, initially I was thinking about putting my knight on the g5 square, but then I started to think maybe in future there would be some problems with him pushing forward with f4, and maybe my knight was just going to be a liability in the way of things. So I decided instead of a new plan where I would just bring the knight to a nice square. Like at the moment I have this pawn on d5, so I thought if I can go from d6 to c4, this will be a really nice spot for the knight. And also d6 is already a nice square as well because we control so many light squares. So I go knight d6, and here the opponent cannot take this pawn because it's having to defend the knight on d4. So this is kind of nice. I can just leave this pawn hanging forever. My opponent now plays the move b3, and b3 looks a little bit strange because it opens up this diagonal where the rook and the knight stand on the same diagonal. So it looks like I can easily apply some more pressure. And I thought about playing something like knight b5 straight away, but then I realized that if I go and take this rook in the corner after this trade over here, I would not be in a good spot right now. Here's two strong bishops, and this knight is also looking really nice. So he would just have two pieces for the rook. So I was looking at this and then I was like, oh, that's not even a good move. So I threw that idea away and I was like, okay, well, I can't win anything right now. It looks like I should be able to win something for some reason because all of the pressure is on this diagonal. But sometimes when you're attacking, you just have to slow down and play a preparing or like developing slow move. So I decide on a move and I play the move bishop to d7 here. And here I'm just trying to take control of this diagonal. Maybe I'll play knight b5 in future with some ideas of trading and putting pressure along here. And this just develops another piece and also connects my two rooks together. So now I have the opportunity for this rook to come to the c file because the bishop's moved out of the way. So this was my idea here. And then now he plays the move queen d2 with two pieces now attacking the h6 pawn. But still he's not threatening to take because d4 will still hang. So here I decide to play the move knight b5. And now the plan is that if he takes, I can either take this rook in the corner or I can take the knight. So if I take the rook in the corner, now the difference is that that you can't take back over here because the rook would be hanging in the corner, because the queen has now moved off of the back rank, and also this knight on b5 would be hanging as well. So this would just be a really big attack here. So yeah, knight b5 looks like a nice way to go. So he can't really take on b5 because then I would just be winning some material. So instead he plays the move rook to d1, just moving his rook out of the way of this attack. Now I bring in my rook and I'm just creating an attack on this pawn. For example, if takes and the queen takes on d5, I thought that maybe I could just go bishop to c6, put some pressure over here, and also my rook would be attacking this bishop as well. And I wouldn't have an extra pawn anymore, but my pieces are just all in really nice positions. So I felt like this was a good way to go if we would get these trades. So he does take, and I take back, but for some reason he does not take on d5, which I was very surprised about. Maybe he saw something he didn't like here, but he did not take the pawn. And I feel like this is when maybe things started to go a little bit wrong. He played the move bishop to b1. I guess what he was maybe worried about was if takes, maybe he was worried that I could be taking over here and there would be a big attack on the second rank. So this is maybe what he was worried about, so he wanted to move his bishop out of the way. So here he moves the bishop, and now I do just have a tactic which wins the exchange. But I was thinking here for a while, this is where time was getting really low for my opponent and it was starting to get low for myself. And I saw this like pretty much straight away. I was like, okay, I do have this move. It is a tactic and I will be winning a rook over here. But I was like, am I actually going to win this position? After these trades, I was a little bit scared because he would have the two bishops in this open position where my king is a little bit weak. So I was like, am I actually winning here? And I thought for quite a while, but then I realized, no, it definitely must be winning just because his king is also in danger as well. And my two rooks were really active. And I didn't think that there was any way that they could force a checkmate or anything like that. So after here, he takes the pawn on d5, and I could play the move bishop c6 first, attacking the queen, but I decided to just take the rook over on e1, sorry, to give him the choice of what bishop to take, because I thought, okay, if I go bishop c6 first, attacking the queen, then the queen will move somewhere, and then after takes, it's very simple to just go, okay, I'll take back with the rook. But I wanted to give him the choice because I felt like if I can keep my dark square bishop on the board, put it on the g3 square, then I would control all the squares around the king and I would have really good chances to attack. And this looks really tempting because the queen is also coming in to attack a lot of the pawns over on the queen side, and maybe my opponent would think that they're winning enough pawns for it to be equal. So that's why I decided to give them the option. The best move is to just take on e1 though, but my opponent takes on b5. And now I have the opportunity to move the bishop back to g3 and attack the king. So here I was starting to feel pretty good. I was like, okay, I'm most probably winning, but my opponent is going to take some pawns and I need to be really precise because it was one of those kinds of positions where, okay, I'm up 2 points of material, but quickly they can win some material back. And if I'm not careful, he can take on h6 too. And suddenly I could be losing. So I needed to be really careful here. So he took on b7, and here I felt like I found a nice move here, rook to d8. And here the threat is just that my rook is going to come in and there is checkmate threats because my opponent cannot move their bishop off the back, sorry, their king off the back rank. So my opponent moves his rook to the f1 square, and now the rook is really passive. So it's now just defending, and I have a rook which is staring down this file, and I can later use it to infiltrate. So I was feeling good about this move. Now I thought again for a moment. My opponent was also playing really quickly here. He was taking like less than 30 seconds per move, whereas my time was getting lower and lower, and I was panicking a little bit. But I decided now I would go in with the queen. And my plan was to go queen b2 and queen e2, and then bring a rook to d1. And there's really no way to stop checkmate in that situation because there is no way to guard this back rank. So that was my plan here. I brought the queen into b2. And then here he decides to grab another pawn, but this is just too greedy. So what he needs to do is play the move queen to a6. And this stops me from infiltrating over here. And then I can play rook e8. And after bishop e4, yes, I'm still winning, but it's going to be a lot more difficult now. But he decides instead to take this pawn, and this is when I know I'm winning here. I'm like, okay, now after queen e2, I must definitely be winning because this threat is just huge. So he goes bishop d4 just to block off this this file, so I can't play the move rook to d1. And he has 3 minutes left on the clock now. This bishop does look a little bit intimidating here, but the queen is quite far away and it would take a few moves for him to come in and play a checkmate. So I wasn't too worried. So here I decided to go for a little bit of a tricky move. Maybe this wasn't the best way to play. Maybe instead I should have just played bishop f4, threatening to sacrifice the rook and then fork the king and queen. Say if something like this, we would have this tactic. So bishop f4 was probably better here, but I was kind of playing a little bit for a trick. Like if you go here, I have queen f1, sacrificing the queen and then getting a checkmate. So that was my plan there. So my opponent plays the move bishop to e4, and this blocks off the e file. So now I no longer have this checkmate threat. But now, with 15 minutes on the clock, I find the move bishop f4, and I still have this threat where I can sacrifice the rook and then go for a fork here. And this is just really, really tricky to defend. My opponent goes for a last minute attack here with the move bishop g6, because if I just take this, I'm getting checkmated. There's a few tricks here, I guess, because like also if I don't defend f7, like if I play something like this, queen f7 would be checkmate as well. So there's a lot of checkmate threats with this move. My opponent is throwing in this move just to see if I can defend it, basically. He has 2 minutes on the clock, and this is the last minute effort. But here I play the move rook e7, and this blocks off the 7th rank. So if you take on f7, now the rook can just capture. And it also forces the queen to move away, recreates this threat of taking on e3 and forking, and also threatens to take the bishop. So there's just way too many threats here. My opponent plays the last effort. He plays the move queen b6, attacking my rook, trying to, I don't know, trying to see if, you know, maybe I will blunder this. I hope I wouldn't. But here I can just play the move rook e5. There's no good checks because my bishop controls the b8 square, my rook controls d8 square, and then here if you take, I win your queen, but otherwise you're just going to be down material and probably getting checkmated soon, like if you move your bishop away, rook d1, and we just have this same threat where my bishop is controlling escape squares. And yeah, so here, after I take the bishop, my opponent resigns and I win round number 3. So that was the round number 3 recap for you guys. That was a really intense game. He got really low on time, but he was just playing so fast at the end. I started to panic. I was like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm losing. but he played really, really well. Okay, so now we have round number 4. So round number 4, I was paired against a kid again. Oh, getting paired against kids is like my biggest fear in chess tournaments. I saw his birth year and I was so sad. He was also having a really good tournament. So I was really nervous about this game, but also excited. I was also really, really excited. So here I decided to play e4, and I'd prepared something a little bit strange for my opponent because I wanted to get him out of theory. I saw he played a mainline English attack, and I was like, I'm going to try something a little bit weird and different, even if it's not going to be a win today. Usually I would just play like queen d2, and you know, this is basically all theory here, and you push the pawns over here, your opponent pushes the pawns here, and you try and checkmate each other. But there's just so much theory in this particular line of the knight off that it's almost like this variation is almost like solved. You can just memorize it all if you want to be crazy. Okay, maybe not exactly, but that's how it feels when you're playing against it. So I was like, I want to play something a bit different. So instead of playing queen d2, on the 8th move, I decided to play queen d3. And this was just based on what I saw in a niche Giri course, because, you know, like a niche Giri gives all the knight off advice and I'll follow it all. But I saw that you can play the move bishop e2, and then you transpose into some different lines that maybe the opponent won't be super familiar with, or maybe not realize that they're transposing, get in an unfamiliar territory. So after queen d3, my opponent started to think, yes, it's working. I'm making my opponent think. And he decides after a while to just play the move bishop e6, and I develop my bishop to e2. And then he plays the move knight d7. So he's just developing his pieces. And then here I play the move knight d5. And here, the idea of putting the queen on d3 is that after a trade like this, the bishop cannot go to the f5 square like it could if the queen was on the d2 square. So here it sort of forces the opponent to give up the bishop pair really early, taking on d5 with the bishop. And then also another idea is that if they go knight b6, I can play the move c4. And this defends everything, and I'll maybe just castle on the king side. So this was the idea of the opening. So we did have this trade, and then my opponent castles, and I also castle. And here he plays the move b5, which is actually a really nice move. And here I had to start to think, because I was like, okay, I've been trying to look at lines where I play the move c4, but now this isn't possible because the b5 pawn would just take me if I go there. So this was when I was starting to feel like the pressure playing an opening I've never played before. I was a little bit confused, but I decided after a while to play a4, which was the best move, which I was happy about. And here the idea is just, you know, we've got a lot of attackers on this pawn, and then if you take, my rook is going to take, and I have so many attackers on a6, I'm probably going to win that pawn. So here my opponent just plays the move queen to c7, very calm. You can take this pawn over here, but it gets a little bit scary after the queen comes into c2, so I don't think this was a good idea. Instead, I just decided to push forward with the move a5. The reason why I decided on the move a5 was that I was a little bit worried about this threat, that the knight was going to come to b6, and then there would be a lot of attackers on this d5 pawn, and I wanted to just control the b6 square. But now I realize it was not really good to take away the tension this early, because obviously I have this threat on b5, and I probably want to keep that threat on b5 because my opponent can never really take because of the attack on a6. So I think that playing a5 was already quite a bad move. And also with knight b6 stuff, maybe I could just take the knight with the bishop. There's nothing stopping me from doing that. So yeah, this was not the best decision. Okay, so on the next move, he plays rook to c8, and here he's got two attackers on the c2 pawn, so I need to defend it. I decide to bring my f rook to the c1 square, just keeping this rook on the a file. Now my opponent plays the move queen b7, attacking the pawn on d5. He's got two attackers here. I did look at the possibility that I could play this move bishop f3 for a moment, but after e4 and takes, there's the move knight e5, and after my queen moves away, then this bishop is hanging. So yeah, I could not play bishop f3 to defend the pawn. So instead, I just decided that I would bring the rook back and defend the pawn with the rook. But here already my opponent's creating the threats and I'm having to defend them, which is not exactly the situation that you want to be in if you're playing with the white pieces. So here my opponent plays rook c7, going to double up the rooks. And I decide to bring my other rook to the c file, trying to defend this in advance. He then brings the other rook over, and I decide here just to play the move h3. I want to stop any knight g4 threats, also create some space for my king, keep it safe, that sort of thing. So I play that. He plays h6, and here I make a mistake. I make a very big mistake. So I had seen in some lines that you have this idea to play f4, and after takes and takes, the knight can come to e5, but you can capture this d6 ideas, and this is pretty nice. So f4 was the idea, just to try and attack the center, like attack this e5 pawn in the middle. But when I played it, it was just a big mistake. It was a big mistake, and I was instantly worse here. So yes, this was a move I did not think about enough. I only took 3 minutes on this move. I should have taken a little bit longer, maybe instead played something like c3. Just removing the attack on this pawn here and just keeping it a little bit chill. Also giving the opportunity for my queen to move back along this diagonal. So yeah, f4 was a big problem here. And my opponent plays this really annoying move, rook to c4. And I'm like, oh no, I'm going to be losing a pawn. I'm going to be losing a pawn by force, because the problem is that my queen and my rook are having to defend this c2 pawn. but basically no matter what I do, I can't keep this defended. Now, the engine says I should just play g3. And this does defend the pawn. This does defend the pawn, but it looks pretty crazy to play. And if you take here with the bishop, you're already worse. And the king is really unsafe. It feels really, really unsafe, but this would have been a way to hold on to the pawn if I wanted to. But all I could see, I was calculating so many lines, but all I could see was just trading. The knight takes on e5, queen d2, and after knight e4, the queen goes back to e1 and takes. And I was like, okay, this looks pretty bad. This is what I was calculating. So I was like, okay, I have to try something a bit more active. So I decided that after taking, I would go with the queen to the f5 square. And I was like, at least here I'm keeping an eye on this pawn. And my idea was that if they play something like g6 to kick the queen away, after my queen goes back, I then at least have a threat on this h6 pawn. So this was my idea. So I decided that I would go for this. I play queen f5, he plays g6 attacking my queen. I go all the way back, he takes on c2, and now I take the pawn on h6. So I'm like, okay, yay, I've taken a pawn, but now he can take another pawn. So that was not really great. But here I knew I was already probably losing, and I was just looking for ways to find hope, basically. So he takes the pawn on b2, and here I decide to go knight to d4. This is a little bit of a tricky move, because if he takes the pawn with the queen over here, then I just, well, okay, actually, this rook is hanging, sorry. So if he takes here, and then after the bishop takes, if he then takes the pawn, I don't know what I'm talking about. This is hanging. Okay. I just ignore everything that I said. I was looking at some calculations where for some reason he couldn't take the pawn, but obviously he can't anyway because his other pieces are hanging. So just ignore what I was saying there. But I was calculating something. I think my brain was not entirely working because I was looking at lines where he would take this, but that just hangs a rook. So just ignore that. Okay, so he trades, and then I take with the bishop attacking the rook, and he moves his rook to the a2 square. And here I decide to play the move knight to b3, just trying to defend on a5 because I really couldn't see much else. I was just trying to hold on to as many pawns as I possibly could because I was already down one, but I was like, okay, I do have the two bishops. If in some scenario I can win back one pawn, I have the two bishops in this open position. Maybe there's some checkmating ideas. I knew I was definitely worse, but I was just trying to survive here. So here my opponent plays a really nice move, queen c8. And this threatens to just infiltrate, attacking my knight and coming into the king side without much way for me to defend. So I decide to play the move queen e1, trying to stop the queen from coming into c3, but obviously he can still play something like queen c2 if he wants to. So the pieces are really getting in and starting to attack. He plays queen c2, and now I just try my very best to hold on to the piece and not lose stuff. So I play the move knight d4, attacking the queen because he's attacking my knight at the moment, and the queen moves to e4, and this is just a really nice move that shuts down anything that I want to do. I mean, there's just a lot of threats here. I was looking at playing the move rook d2 here. Is that what I played in the end? I think that's what I played in the end. But there was something else that I was looking at. There was something else that I was looking at. Oh no, I was looking at rook d2. Yes, I did not play rook d2. I was looking at rook d2 here, but then the rook can come into a1, and it's just really annoying. All the pieces are just coming into attack, and I don't have much to really defend with. And here, I do decide to try and go for a counter-attack, and I play the move queen to c3. And my idea is that maybe I can just go and try and pick up some pawns. For example, if my opponent does this and takes two pieces for the rook, I would just go rook e1, attack the queen, but he can go queen c4, so this is definitely losing. But I thought maybe I could throw in this check first, and then after king g7, put the rook on f1 and then take the a6 pawn. And I was like, okay, this pawn on a5 would be quite close to promoting. So if I can take the a6 pawn and maybe win the b5 pawn or something like that, my pawn is very close to promoting, so I would have some chances. But the engine is very, it's like you have 0 chances. It's telling me I have 0 chance here, which is definitely true. So yeah, my opponent decides not to take on e2, and instead he plays the move knight c4, and I have a small chance here again. The eval goes from like -5, which is absolutely no way in heck you're ever winning this, to like -2, and then I'm like, okay, maybe I have a small chance here again. Now I can't really take here because that hangs a checkmate on g2. So I need to be very careful. I need to be very careful to not hang that checkmate on g2 with the queen and the rook teaming up together. My opponent used a lot of time on this move, by the way, and is down to 4 minutes, and he has to make the next 10 moves in 4 minutes because that is how long until time control. So I decided to play the move bishop f3, which is the best move. And there is only one move for black here that keeps the advantage. So if you play absolutely anything else, if you play like queen e5, then the position is equal again. And if you play, so there's only one square that you can go to. So if you play anything else, I'm going to take your queen. So that's not what you want to do. So yeah, this is only one move to win here, but my opponent, he does find it. He plays the move queen h4, and this is a great move, keeps the attack alive and stops me from equalizing. Now I play the move rook to f1, and here I'm basically just trying to defend this threat on f2 because I was a little bit scared about this queen coming in. Apparently I can just ignore it and play the move knight c6, which would have given me some actual chances here, I think. Because here you have to go knight d7, and maybe here I would just trade, get the full bishop pair, and here maybe I have a small chance. So yeah, I did not see this though. I was worried about the threat on f2, and instead I played the move rook f1 to defend first. Now he brings his knight back, and now I play knight c6, trying to bring my knight into attack and bringing it closer to the king. So I'm trying to create counterplay here. I'm also thinking in the future that I want to attack this f7 pawn. But now I'm also really low on time and I'm down below 10 minutes. He plays the move bishop f6, a great move, attacking my queen, keeping all of his pieces really nice and active and making me move again. I move to b3, attacking the rook, and here he plays rook a1. And now I have to deal with this annoying pin on my bishop to the rook. Here I play queen c2, just trying to defend things, and now he brings his knight in, and these two knights are working really well together to come in and attack, and I was like, okay, if I want to keep any chance at surviving this, I have to keep the two bishops on. So I move my bishop back, and I don't let it get traded. He plays king g7, and he has just 30 seconds left. He has 8 seconds when he presses the clock on his move, because you get 30 seconds added per move. So he's got 4 moves left to make, and he has 30 seconds on the clock. I decide to play the move queen b3. This was just, I was really unsure of what to play here. I mean, I knew I could take this, but I was like, I want to keep my bishops on the board. I want to play with the 2 bishops, and that's what I wanted to do. And I couldn't really move any of my other pieces, so I was like, okay, let's move the queen. Let's move the queen and try and bring it into the game. He just grabs a pawn. Now he takes, and I trade, and now I bring in my bishop to f4. And here, I thought this was a nice way to sort of cut his queen off and get it out of the game, because now the queen can't go along the 4th rank because my bishop is blocking. But my opponent just plays the move g5, attacking my bishop, which is like, okay, that's annoying. He found a nice move here. And he's on move 39. He's got 1 move left to make. I play the move bishop g3, attacking the queen, and he moves his queen over to e4, attacking my bishop on e2. I have to move the bishop. I move it to h5 because, okay, here now I'm creating a threat on f7. He offers the queen trade. I decline, obviously, because I'm worse. And now he plays an absolutely brilliant move. He plays the move rook to a1 here. And this was just a soul-crushing move. I mean, I could have resigned at this point, because when I take, the knight moves out of the way. And after I play something like rook takes, after I play like bishop takes, the bishop is going to take on a1. And then if I try and go into this endgame thinking that I have two bishops and a rook for the queen, which would be nice, he can just play the move queen d4. And in the end, take this rook on a1, and I'm just completely losing. So this was just a beautiful, beautiful move by my opponent. But I have nothing else to do because this rook is on a1. Like, I can play the move queen e2, but that's just admitting that I'm going to be trading into a losing endgame, like takes, and after all these pieces are traded off, these pawns over here are just so fast. So yeah, I was like, okay, I'm just gonna take, and here I took with the rook rather than going into this line where I would take with the bishop, because I wanted to keep my bishop active and take on f7 in the end, rather than recapturing the rook with the rook, because there would be the fork. So after this, I take with the rook, and then I play this check. The king goes to h6, and then I have just a little bit of hope that maybe there will be some checkmating ideas. The king is stuck over on this side of the board, and I do have the two bishops and the rook working together. Technically, only down 2 points of material, but obviously these pawns over here are absolutely killer, and my pieces aren't doing too much. I move my bishop back, and then he just grabs the pawn. I play rook to e7, threatening to come in with a check and also threatening to take the d6 pawn. He checks. I move the king out of the way. I decide to go to h1 instead of h2, because if I go h2, then he can just force this trade, although apparently this is almost equal again. But yeah, not really equal. But anyway, I didn't go there because I was like, then he can force the trade. But my opponent here makes a mistake. And there is actually a crazy way to draw this position. Like, it is just equal after the move bishop f5. And the idea is that we're threatening checkmate over here, right? So what you have to do is stop this checkmate. If you put the bishop on g7, I can play the move rook e6. And then the king really has nowhere to go, because if you go down here, you're getting checkmated. So you would just have to block with the bishop, and then suddenly the material is equal again. So this is absolutely crazy. You can also play this check, and then even though you can check me and my king walks out to g3, after you check me here, I'll just walk my king back to h2, and after g4, h4, and the queen has to go back to g8 to defend the checkmate threat. And this is just crazy. Now the king can walk in and play king g3, and then after something like b4, we can give checks over here. And basically we can just keep repeating the moves and playing checks. And in the end, my bishop would be able to stop the pawns if he sacrifices the queen or something like that. But this was just a crazy draw. So this shows you that to always keep some hope in your classical games, always keep some hope to survive. Unfortunately, I did not play the move bishop f5. I didn't play it. The funny thing was, I was thinking about playing it, but then I decided to play something else instead. I played bishop f2, and then I was like, I'll play bishop f5 on the next move. But now he has time to escape with the king, and a few moves later, he just pushes the pawn all the way to the end, and I play on some moves, but it's just all over, and I lose this game. So I lose the fourth game. So now I would be on 2.5 out of 4 with 2 wins, 1 draw, and 1 loss. But what a game. It was super crazy and super exciting, and my opponent played super well, deserved to have that win all the way. Never play f4, I guess this is the lesson that I learned. And yeah, but the rest of the tournament, I'm from the future, so I can tell you the rest of the tournament has been going well. So make sure you guys watch the rest of the recaps, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!